So breaking it into the categories, we'll start with the buyer complaints. The most common is inauthentic complaints. For my advice for sellers, when you initially opt as a seller, if you decide to become a seller, I know you said you were interested, you're going to automatically be prompted into two features. One is called the commingling feature if you use fulfillment by Amazon. The other is called return and repackaging. Now, honestly, the two biggest problems for sellers who sell genuine products and authentic goods, they don't realize they're opted into what's called commingling and what's called the repackage and return. Essentially what this means, commingling, if you use Amazon to fulfill your orders, you could go to Walmart, you can go to Target, you could buy it directly from Nike themselves. But if you are opted into the commingling feature, what that does is when you send a package to Amazon's facility, it gets bulked in a back room with everybody else, all the other sellers who send the same product into the same ASIN page. So when the customer actually places their order, there's no telling whether it was fulfilled from you, whether it was the box he might have sent there, and what constantly happens is one sour apple ruins it for the rest, and they opt for commingling, they sell counterfeit goods, and it puts the guys selling the genuine things at risk. This is probably one of the most common causes of suspensions. How do you avoid it? When you sign up as an Amazon seller, unless it's truly feasible for you or you have a reason, I would avoid the commingling feature and the return repackage feature. What return repackage is, if somebody returns the product and Amazon makes the determination, not the business owner, not the person whose integrity is on the line, but Amazon makes the determination, is this good enough to still be sold as new? If it is, they don't bother sending it back. They literally just close the box, put another piece of Amazon tape over it. Problem with that is somebody bought it new, and understandably they'll be upset if they see the product was opened, if hardware is missing, if they're sold a unit. So these are two features which are automatically prompted in. If you can live without them, I would avoid them because they're often a big cause of inauthentic complaints. Used sold as new complaints. Damaged items, this usually deals with large bulk shipping. If you use reputable freight companies like USPS, UPS, FedEx, there's generally no issues. But buyer complaints are everything. Amazon doesn't care about the seller in any sense. The buyer is 100% the experience. The buyer is always right, even if you are 100% correct. So it really, you have to go above and beyond to cater to the buyer. There's a few things you could do to kind of ensure that you cater to the buyer as well. Turnaround response time. Let's say you did use commingling. Let's say you truly bought it from Walmart. You're like, there's no way what I sold you could be an inauthentic product. It might be beneficial to reach out to them, give them the refund on it, explain the discrepancy, rather than have them go forward and file the complaint because they're dissatisfied, because one inauthentic complaint could result in the suspension of your account. Now, I have something.
Yeah, I just wanted to interrupt for a second. We saw some new faces come into the room. Who here is currently selling on Amazon? Anyone?
Excellent.
Okay, so before I let Travis keep going, I'm just curious, have anybody who's already selling on Amazon ever received either a notification or a notification that resulted in a suspension based on any of these issues? Okay, and Miss, which one was it?
Late shipment. Now, were you doing seller fulfilled or fulfillment by Amazon? You were shipping it out? Seller fulfilled. Are you, okay, yeah, because I was going to say typically if you get suspended for any seller fulfilled issue, almost always, if you opt to go with FBA, they'll bring you right back online. I know it's not as, they've got their storage fees, they've got their processing fees, so it's not as ideal, but yeah. Honestly, it's good though because it saves you the trouble and you don't have to worry about that 2-day turnover, 3-day turnover, so yeah.
And what was yours for?
I'm an agency, so I've seen several.
Oh, okay, so you've seen a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
And like Travis was saying, a lot of the times the commingled inventory gets mixed in with sellers who might be from overseas. They might be trying to cheat the system, send counterfeit versions of the products, generic versions of the same product, and they'll end up, affecting your account. So it's a prompt that's automatically enabled on your account when you create it, and it's as simple as logging in, adjusting your settings, and disabling the commingling feature, and it will definitely save you headaches down the line due to other people's problems.
Yeah, and if you don't commingle and you use a wholesaler, let's say, or distributor who you believe is pretty reputable, I would do your research. A lot of these wholesalers, it's hard to trace the chain of custody from when it left the actual brand to where it's got from where you're purchasing. always be diligent, do a little bit of research, see if there's any issues with the supplier. A lot of times these forums that Amazon sellers are on are great places, as we just discussed, different suppliers. You might put their name into Google and do a little bit of research. But if the deal sounds too good to be true, generally it is, and you want to avoid anything that might come after. Authenticity is huge on Amazon. As you guys and sellers on Amazon are aware, they're constantly battling the counterfeit problems faced. So that's one of the more particular suspensions that they're pretty severe on. You know, if you get an IP complaint, it's one thing. Used sold as new, fine. But authenticity, they treat really serious. We were briefly explaining before just the general areas. I'll track back to a second. We're going to discuss types of suspensions, buyer complaints, policy violations, and infringement complaints. But I know you said you're an agent. You've probably seen a bunch of instances. Feel free to engage us or ask any questions. I'm sure there's some issues we're not going to cover here, but we'd be glad to discuss them with you. So the other type is policy violations. Honestly, what I'd employ every potential seller or current seller to do, just keep familiarized with it. Most of them are pretty straightforward. You'd be surprised. A lot of people we know, I didn't know it was impermissible to operate 2 accounts on Amazon. You know, if you wanted to operate 2 accounts before you just jump the gun and try it, you can actually request permission from Amazon. If you have a legitimate business reason, if it's products of a different, category, they might actually grant it for you. Another one I was discussing before, review manipulation. I know it's all about reviews. It's all about the feedback, especially if you're private labeling your own brands. You want to make sure it's got a good reputation, but you got to be cautious. They don't want you to incentivize somebody for a 5-star review. For Amazon's purposes, it has to be as genuine as possible. If I'm the consumer and I go and I see a 5-star review, it should truly be because the product is a 5-star product, not because the seller is, hey, I'll give you 2 more for free, or I'll give you 50% off your next purchase if you give me 5 stars. They're pretty strict about that. Policy violations are a huge one. You know, sourcing your products is one thing, selling things that are counterfeit, selling things that are authentic to make sure they're not counterfeit, that's all important. But just even starting from the basics, policy violations are everything. Amazon's pretty strict with these as well, because when you sign up with that buyer-seller agreement, you're essentially acknowledging that you've read their policies and that you're going to comply with them. It's an at-will agreement. It's not anything for cause, so they could terminate the contract for any reason. Policy violations are pretty bad. You want to avoid them. They're pretty easy to avoid if you just look through their pages. You don't have to memorize all of them. In my opinion, I'd say the biggest ones to keep track of is just the condition details. I'm not sure if anyone's not an Amazon seller. There's a thing called an ASIN variation. So you're allowed to make variations of certain ASINs. It's usually by the color of the t-shirt or the size of the t-shirt. But if you're using it improperly, for instance, to put your package or to put something that's not supposed to be there on it, huge policy violation. The other one I was saying before, review manipulation, but these are all pretty generally accessible policies that you can review. Just Google Amazon's policies as a seller. Most of these will be straightforward. In a little bit, we'll go into how to actually defend if you're caught doing one of these things.
And I just want to add that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I dealt with a situation, 3 separate accounts.
Sure.
2 separate clients that the Amazon was putting inventory back into stock as new.
Right.
And even though we're receiving used, and they flag us for selling used.
You sold as new. Yeah, so you walked in a couple minutes after I was explaining before. One of the biggest, if we go back, was inauthentic and used sold as new. But the 2 primary causes, which most sellers don't realize, when you join as an Amazon seller, you're automatically prompted into 2 features. One was commingling, where they mix your packages, if you use FBA, at the fulfillment center. And if you sell it, if I sell it, we both use FBA. If we both are opted into commingling, which again, unless you opt out of it, you're automatically placed in, both of our products will go to the consumer. And if they get it, there's no telling whether they bought it from me or from you. But the point is they might have selected you as the buyer, so any complaint they're going to have is going to be associated with that. The second feature you want to make sure you opt out of unless it's truly necessary is the return repackage feature. And essentially what that is, you're automatically prompted into it. Before you fulfill the order, you can actually elect to remove yourself from that feature. And the problem is Amazon makes that determination, just as you said. Of course, they're going to say it's easier for us to just box it back up and ship it out. Why do they want to send the freight back to you? I mean, covering those costs, the time, the effort. Generally, what they do is they make a lot more flexible of a judgment call than the actual seller whose integrity is on the line would make. You might see it and say, that's got a little scratch. This is no good. We got to sell it as used. Amazon's going to say, okay, well, everything's there. Let's just put it back in the box. So many times, individuals are flagged for this. I'm sure as you saw in this situation, they requested a plan of action to address it. three biggest things. I know I was going to say before we'll go over it, but while you got us engaged on the issue, the root cause, what you've done to correct that cause, and how you're going to prevent it, the three major things. If it's truly just that, Amazon actually took the return for the corrective action, ensure you're going to opt out of their return repackaging program. Often that's enough. Physical audits, before things are fulfilled to Amazon, you want to double check and make sure your inventory is all good, everything's boxed. Sometimes if they're still requesting more details, okay, well, this isn't enough, how are you going to prevent it? We like to do a test of the inventory. Sometimes open up one product directly from where you purchased or sourced it. Make sure yourself. Even take images of that. Sometimes we include that in the plans. But simple way to get hit for a used sold as new complaint is forgetting to opt out of that return and repackage feature. I can't tell you how many people we've dealt with on countless occasions who've had that very same similar situation. Good news is if that's truly the cause and that's the only reason someone's receiving something used, just make sure you opt out of it. If you opt out of it,
Ship it back to you?
oh no, if you opt out of that, yes.
Even if they can make no assessment that it's a new.
What do you mean by that?
Anyone that returns an item, they ship back to you. Like, even if it's unopened.
If you opt out, yes. And that's why if it's feasible, if it's a good business decision, if it's convenient for you, if it's not something that occurs frequently, fine. But if you find that this is becoming an ongoing situation, I mean, Amazon's not perfect. Again, like I said, there is the benefit where you don't have to deal with that every time and you don't have to refulfill it or send it back to them as used. But if you allow Amazon to make that determination, often they will repackage it and what I would say is a questionable condition that they determine is new. But one way or another, if you're trying to appeal successfully, definitely want to let them know you're going to opt out of that feature.
So the last thing we touched on was policy violations, and as Travis indicated, our friend Mr. Bezos kind of created his own rules and laws, so to speak, that govern the Amazon platform. And what's important to remember is that when your account gets suspended, it's not just your account gets suspended and you can't conduct business on Amazon. If there's $100,000 of earned fees in your Amazon account, Amazon's going to freeze that. And just because you violate Amazon's policy does not mean that you're doing something illegal, and Amazon has no right to hold your funds indefinitely. So while we want to avoid suspensions, and we'll touch on this a bit more later, it's really important to protect your investment and protect what you're working for, avoid these issues, and in the worst case scenario, Amazon is not willing to accept your appeals or willing to work with you on the issues, there are ways to get that money back, and you should never give up.
Do you find that it's a coincidence that most likely before major holiday time, they sort of suspend your account, and then it just happened that twice already, that after the holiday, they opened it again?
Absolutely not a coincidence. As Travis was saying before, Amazon is across the board dedicated to the consumer experience, and they prioritize the consumer well above the third-party sellers on Amazon. So when the rushes come and when the holiday season hits, they are really honing in on the metrics and the issues and making sure that there's not even the slightest violation. We definitely see an increase in business and calls coming in during those times. So it's, we always advise that when it gets closer to the holidays that you kind of take a look at your account, take a look at your business, maybe watch a few videos or podcasts to get updated on the new things happening at Amazon. We do breaking news every day, but Amazon is constantly changing, and we love to say that they're consistently inconsistent. So the best thing you can do is just, once a month, once a week, refresh those policy pages, make sure there's no changes to the agreements, and just try to be proactive as much as you can.
And you're absolutely right. Before the holiday, you probably couldn't get anybody to respond to you. After the holiday, no problem. You're back up, you're live, your account's selling. It's a combination between, one, preserving the consumer experience. They don't want anybody else during the holiday season to experience this, so they kind of hold off on resolving the issue and put it aside. Second, it's just a high volume. There's a lot of packages going out, a lot of shipments, more vulnerability for things like order defect rates and such. So it just happens in general to be a very busy suspension time for Amazon. Any more questions before we continue? So going back to the policy violations, like we said, generally you can avoid these by just keeping current with the policies. They do change, like I said before. 2 years ago, review manipulation was fully permitted. Now, if you incentivize any consumers for the reviews, that's a big policy violation. It doesn't change too frequently, but often enough where it's good just to keep current. The next thing, infringement complaints. Now, this is where it becomes very interesting. Like I said before, we're intellectual property attorneys, and the way infringement works on Amazon is entirely different than the way it works outside of Amazon. Jeff Bezos has almost created these guidelines and rules which the two can't exist without each other, and it creates this playing field.
It's like the wild, wild west.
It
out
is
there.
the Wild West. Unfortunately, Amazon puts way too much power in the hands of the complainant. They don't do too much. I don't know if any of you have sold on eBay, but on eBay, they won't allow you to file a complaint until you've showed that you actually own the intellectual property rights of this product, to show what your plan is, your justification and explanation on why this person should be taken off the listing. And then after fully vetting the complaint, they allow it to go through. Amazon, consumer experience, someone says there's an IP issue, they take you down, and it's up to you to get a retraction from the rights owner. In our experience, these complainants that file have too much power, and way more frequently than none, a lot of the times they don't even actually own the rights to enforce. So the three most common: copyright, trademark, and patent. You'll see counterfeit, which is a subcategory of trademark. What sellers should know about copyright and good ways to avoid it. What brands might or might not know as they're joining Amazon: when you create a detailed page listing, all the content that goes on that detailed page, including the copyrighted images that are put there, you as the owner and creator of that listing waive the right to claim copyright infringement if somebody else goes and joins that listing. Now, what is copyright infringement, which sellers have to be careful of? There's duplicate listings. There's people who aren't authorized to sell, who want to do it kind of on their own. They want to regulate the details of the page. So what they'll do is go to, let's say, Nike's website. They'll take Nike's images. Now, Nike may have used that original image for that original ASIN. If you join that Nike listing, that's fine. There's no copyright infringement. But if you use that image and you create an identical listing that uses that image, that's copyright infringement. That's justification for that complaint. How to avoid it? Just do your research before you join a listing. Sometimes it's pretty obvious. Sometimes it could be extremely challenging, even as intellectual property attorneys, to say, well, wait, which one was created by Nike's? These look so similar. You can look back to, one thing is how many sellers are on this, the description page. Usually right underneath the title of the product, you'll see the company that created the listing. If you see 3,000 listings that say Nike and one that says Nike shoes or Nike, sneakers, or something that doesn't look conform with the rest of the listings, I would avoid joining those at all costs. Those are also often, causes of suspensions due to IP complaints such as this. Trademark, that's another big one. Like I said, copyright is pretty easy to avoid so long as you join the correct listings and you always use your own original images. If you're going to sell somebody else's product, just make sure you have the rights to use the images associated. Trademark's a little bit more complicated. What prides Amazon sales is the first sale doctrine. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of that, but there's a law in the United States that says if you purchase a product legally and it's in the exact condition as received from the manufacturer, then you are fully authorized under United States law to resell that item. Only exception, and this is where sellers come into a little issue, is if there's a material difference in the product. If I'm selling something and Nike's selling something, the difference in the product I sell, if there's any type of difference, then it's not protected by the first sale doctrine, and they might have a valid claim for trademark infringement. Now, if you buy something from Walgreens, it's in the exact packaging, you're like, how can this be any bit material different than the products sold by the actual brand owner? What a lot of brands do, and if you're thinking about selling one of these brands' items, it's good to look first, check their warranty. The warranty is probably the most common difference you'll see in products. What they can now do, it's almost an artificial way to create a material difference so they can kind of override the first sale doctrine and still regulate the distribution of their products. They'll say our warranty, which is 5 years, doesn't apply to unauthorized sellers. Only if you've purchased directly from our website or one of the 10 people listed below will the warranty apply. Well, now there's a problem. If I'm selling this product, it only comes with the 90-day Amazon guarantee, and the brand themselves sells it, it comes with a 5-year warranty. The courts have held that is enough to constitute trademark infringement. In my experience, it all comes down to distribution, exclusivity, regulating their MAP pricing. If you're unfamiliar with MAP pricing, it's just the advertised pricing. If Nike's selling it for $60 a shoe, they don't want you to go on and sell for $40 because it's going to take away all their sales. Now, there's no intellectual property law that protects that. How do they do it? They create this artificial material difference. It's almost always the warranty. If it's some sort of beauty product or something someone ingests, it's usually a quality control provision that they employ. it's always good if you're thinking about selling a product to do the research first. Go to the brand's website. They'll almost always have some portion and some exculpatory language under the warranty which states it doesn't apply to unauthorized sellers. I can tell you right now, especially if it has the term Amazon in there, if you're considering selling that product on Amazon and you're not an authorized seller, while yes, generally the first sale would protect you, I would avoid it because the first thing they're going to do is file one of these complaints against you. But best way to avoid that, check the brand first, go to their warranty, see if there's any restrictions, because if you truly are just buying a genuine product, the only way there's really going to be a material difference is by warranty.
So a lot of the time what it comes down to, like Travis was saying, is controlling the supply chain. It often happens a lot with fragrances or cosmetic products or products that are sold typically, for example, like Avon, where it's sold through a marketing program. And those companies don't want their products being sold through middlemen or different distributors and then resold on Amazon, because they lose control of the sale and they lose control of what they consider quality controls. So if you're going to sell certain types of products that are distributed in this type of way, or that you might not be getting directly from the manufacturer, you might be getting from someone local, you should definitely check in on that brand and research their warranty to make sure they don't have any caveats that only apply to sales on Amazon.com. Because basically, like Travis said, the first sale doctrine means you can go to the store and resell something the way you see it in the store, legally, no problem. But if there's some sort of material difference that the company adds some bogus language into their warranty so that they can, try to control the Amazon marketplace, it's something that courts do uphold, and you should make sure to avoid it.
One good way also to combat that, the warranty difference, it doesn't necessarily take you off the hook, but it significantly weakens their claim. If they're offering a 5-year warranty, then you as an Amazon seller, if you're truly set on selling that product and you're aware of that warranty difference, you yourself should offer your own 5-year policy on top of Amazon's 90-day guarantee, because there's just as much as there's case law that says the material difference constitutes trademark infringement. If that difference is so minimal, the court's not going to allow it to be risen to the level where it would constitute infringement. So if you're truly set on selling that product and there is a warranty difference, it's always good to offer your own equal, if not greater, warranty, because then it really makes that difference so minimal that it won't likely rise to the level of infringement. And the last one is patent. Patent's a little more complicated. Unlike trademark and copyright, with patent, especially as an Amazon reseller, one, it's hard to be aware of disputes, and you usually don't know about the dispute between the two companies until it's too late and you're actually receiving some sort of report of infringement or a cease and desist letter threatening a lawsuit. So with patent law, anybody in the chain of sale, whether they've sold it or not, anybody offering for sale the infringing product is still liable for patent infringement. Good thing is, if you ever run into this issue, and these brands are generally pretty good about retracting those complaints as long as you're willing to stop selling the disputed product. If you're actually the brand, the private label owner, and you're manufacturing your own products and you find yourself, a victim of a patent infringement complaint, well, then there's other ways to go about it. Few things we're able to do is always argue the validity of the patent. You could find prior art or someone who's done something so substantially similar first that it renders their patent invalid. Things like that. Patent disputes are a little bit more complicated. Like I said, you generally won't know. There's no real way to look up ahead of time. If you're thinking about selling a brand, generally if there's a patent dispute, that kind of thing is in the news, that kind of thing is public. Other than that, if you find yourself victim to a patent complaint, Amazon is difficult to appeal with that. Mostly the best success is going to come from getting a retraction from the rights owner. But again, if you usually just say, I'm not going to sell this, I was unaware of any dispute, I was just reselling this product in accordance with the first sale. Now that you've put me on notice, I respect your position. They're good about retracting. And if you do want to fight it, there's other ways to do it. Those are the 3 most common forms of intellectual property law that you see on Amazon. The way I said before, where Jeff Bezos kind of intertwines it into his own creative work, Amazon itself states that exclusivity, the enforcement of distribution, enforcement of map pricing does not constitute infringement. And in fact, when you file an infringement complaint, you're checking a box that certifies and swears that this is fully plausible, the claim is legitimate. What happens is a lot of time, it's just about enforcement, it's just about distribution. So the material difference argument we discussed before is generally that artificial way to enforce their exclusivity despite Amazon's rules that say that's not constituting infringement, if that makes any sense. So again, if you think someone's going to enforce their MAP pricing, if you see that somebody is pretty strict about enforcing their distribution, check for the warranty. If they're not brand gated and you could join their listing, it's always good to do the research first rather than just join it. You're good, you're selling, and then all of a sudden you receive a handful of these complaints, which compromises your account.
And there is a note at the bottom of the slide, if you guys notice. You can also be suspended for submitting false or bogus IP complaints or intellectual property complaints against other sellers. But that also means that you all, if you're private label sellers, or if you're interested in starting your own brand or your own product line, the first step should always be filing for a trademark, registering your product photos with the US Copyright Office, so that if anybody tries to hijack your products or you become wildly successful and they want to go to China and try to bribe your manufacturer, you then have the power to fight and use the mechanisms that Amazon has in place to do the same thing. So it does go both ways, especially for the private label sellers. You should, if you don't know about intellectual property, we're happy to discuss it further with you at the booth. But it definitely, a trademark is relatively easy to file for. It's relatively inexpensive, and especially for private label sellers, it could severely increase the value of your business and your ability to control the Amazon marketplace.
Exactly. So preparing for suspensions, kind of as we discussed before, you want to check, do a little bit of research. If you're using a supplier and the price is too good to be true, in our opinion, it generally is too good to be true, you want to check the supply chain. You want to know who this supplier is sourcing their goods from, because if you do sell these products on Amazon and for whatever reason they get flagged for counterfeit, flagged as inauthentic, Amazon is going to want to see good invoices. Maintaining your invoices is always huge. Amazon likes to see that the invoices provided not just cover the one complaint you received, but all sales made within the last 365 days. So if you're submitting an invoice and you sold 3,000 products, you want to make sure the invoices you're sending are, one, within the last 365 days or at the 365-day mark, and two, cover all sales quantity within. So keeping good records, making sure you always save your invoices, and don't ever do anything to document the invoices. Sometimes it's tempting. I think the one permissible thing is you could redact your pricing so Amazon doesn't actually see what you were paying. That's permitted. Anything else is going to result in a huge suspension. Given the invoice as is, if there's a discrepancy where the buyer maybe shows a different address or name, you explain, okay, that's our entity, that's the LLC address that's established, that was used as the name for our Amazon account. And you can always draw that connection. Don't do it yourself, don't make any adjustments. But keeping invoices, good invoices for 365 days at a time is always a good way, a preventative measure to combat these inauthentic complaints when they come in.
And just as a reminder, it says right there in big letters, do not forge or alter. And forgery is one thing, but even slight alterations to the invoices will sometimes flag a forgery issue with Amazon. And those are the hardest types of issues to resolve. And like I said before, Amazon will hold all of the funds in your account if you're flagged for one of these types of issues. One of the clients that we have was drop shipping inventory from other e-commerce sites and fulfilling the orders as they receive them on Amazon by shipping it directly to the consumer. This is against Amazon's policy. It's not illegal, but it's against Amazon's policy because they want to make sure that each seller is handling the inventory and making sure it's in proper condition before selling it to their consumers. So what happened to this person is that Amazon, they requested the invoices from him to evidence the authenticity of his products. Of course, they were real. He was getting them from other retailers like Walmart and Macy's and things like that. But instead of supplying the invoices he had from Macy's that didn't go back 365 days, he made fake invoices that said that he bought them from where he bought them from, with the accurate quantities, with the right prices. Everything was truthful, but it was just his summary. Amazon took away $280,000 from that man. So it's something that they take really seriously. They enforce their own policy as if it's law, and then they try to justify holding the funds as if they're preventing some fraud or counterfeit ring that doesn't necessarily exist.
And one helpful thing, if your invoice doesn't date back, if it's over 365 days past what they're requiring, better to submit that and show that even though it was 2 years old, if you look back from 2 years to today, you see 3,000 units were purchased, we've only sold 2,600, it still shows that all the things you're fulfilling still date back. Better to submit the outdated invoice than to, again, like Rob said.
I had an invoice once that was paid for Europe, so it was dated the European way.
Okay.
I guess I'm very back with you, so there's no shame.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Amazon, I'm sure as a lot of you know, Amazon doesn't necessarily always respond with a human when you're writing to them or when you're supplying invoices or whatever. So sometimes their system will flag things incorrectly, and unfortunately persistence is sometimes what's needed to resolve. Yep.
We'll have to go back to the police guy and say, please figure out how to correct English.
Yeah, and actually, I was going to say, if you run into a dead end there, what you can always do is reach out to your supplier. A lot of times what they accept is a letter of authorization from your supplier, which says exactly that. I, on this date, sold this amount of units to so-and-so, fulfilled it to this address, and the products that were sold were so-and-so. And it's just kind of like a memorandum of the invoice. If there's ever any issue, if a date's not there, send the invoice that you have and send an authorization letter if you can get that. That'll always help to clarify those details.
Like for you, sir, I'm sure it was tempting to just go in yourself and switch the dates, right? But if you did that,
Exactly.
you could have ended up in some deep water. So it's better to give Amazon what it wants, maybe in a different way, like Travis said, with a memo from the company or something like that. But seriously, even if it seems like you're doing the right thing, don't alter your invoices.
Yeah, in our experience, there's 2 suspensions which are very, very difficult to come back from. Forged invoices or manipulated documentation, and the second is related account suspensions. Related account's a big one. It's tempting sometimes to operate multiple accounts. One might act as an insurance. If this one gets suspended, I'm still in business on this one. I can keep going. There's ways to go about it. You can actually request approval from Amazon if there's a legitimate business reason for it. Always good to request approval first, then to go that route, because if you get flagged for whatever reason having 2 accounts and they're not authorized accounts, it's very challenging to come back from that and from a forged document case. Key points in crafting the appeal: you always want to be concise. Generalizing is not necessarily the greatest thing. You want to be specific about what caused it. The more detail you put into identifying what caused it, chances are the more detail you're actually going to provide yourself in figuring out how to correct it. As we were talking about before, the individuals who received used sold as new complaints then realized they were still opted into the return repackage program, which, if you're unfamiliar, I'll explain again. You automatically, as a seller, are prompted into the return repackage feature, and what that does is Amazon, if somebody makes a return, uses their flexible determination, what's convenient for them, to say, oh, this is good enough to sell as new, and they'll box it back up, put a piece of tape on, and fulfill it to the customer. If that's truly what caused it, then the corrective actions for that suspension will be opting out of that feature going forward. Audit the inventory, maybe, like I said, do a test sample, but it's really good to be detailed, but keep it concise. Like we always say, you should be able to leave your Amazon appeal on a bench stop somewhere, and anybody, a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, someone who works in a restaurant, they should be able to pick up that document and understand the purpose of what you're trying to tell them. So you want to keep it simple enough, layman's terms, that anybody from Amazon, because you never know who's going to be on the receiving end or reviewing it, will be able to understand, or where in the world they might be, their level of education. So you want to be concise, you want to be detailed, but you want to make it very easy to read. Bullet points are always helpful, and preventative measures are key. There's lots and lots of preventative measures. You can always look on, we have a website, AmazonSellersLawyer.com. We have plenty of blogs which give tips on these kind of things should you need the instance or need the advice. But preventative measures are huge. I'd say of the whole plan, that's probably got to be the most detailed. Because for Amazon, again, it's always about the customer experience. They want to be sold on why this is not going to happen a second time. So what happens if your appeal is unsuccessful? You've tried everything. Maybe you hired Amazon Seller's Lawyer and we're still at a dead end. As I stated earlier in the introduction, I'm not sure if many are here, I'm the managing attorney for Rosenbaum Famularo, the law firm behind Amazon Seller's Lawyer. I manage both the litigation and the Amazon suspensions. Rob manages the arbitration and the intellectual property enforcement. So if you're at a dead end and the Amazon appeal process is not working for you, it's actually not the end of the road. I believe currently we represent close to 70%, if not more, of the current arbitrations brought against Amazon. And Rob will talk with you a little bit about what entails.
So, like Travis said, it's the last option when you're unsuccessful with the appeal process with Amazon. Like I said earlier, Amazon has these policy violations that they put in place. And first and foremost, these policy violations are not illegal and give Amazon no justification to hold your funds. But unfortunately, we see a lot of the time, Amazon will indefinitely hold sellers' funds. Sometimes we see people come to us after a year, 2 years has passed, and they have maybe sometimes over $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 being held by Amazon for a policy violation. So we don't want to see you go to arbitration, but arbitration is a way to take the decision out of Amazon's hands and have a neutral party make a decision. And we'll get into a little bit about how it works, but some of you are probably thinking, why wouldn't I sue Amazon? So when you sign up for Amazon, there's something called the Amazon Services Business Solutions Agreement. Has anybody ever heard of that before? How many people sell on Amazon in the room again? And none of you have ever read the Business Solutions Agreement that you signed up for when you? No one. All right, I'm giving you homework and you all have to read it before this time next week because it is extremely important to realize that Amazon literally has the power to pretty much do whatever they want to you. The contract is at will, meaning they could suspend you because they decide they don't like your haircut. That's a joke I make. But it also has a clause, it's paragraph 19, and it basically forces anybody who contracts with Amazon to resolve all disputes through arbitration. You can arbitrate pretty much any issue you come across on the Amazon platform, whether it's account suspension, inventory disputes, and we'll get into some of the other reasons as we go on. But unfortunately, there is no litigation. Courts in Washington, courts across the country has upheld this clause of the Amazon's Business Solutions Agreement, and you're pretty much forced only to be able to go to arbitration. So we like to say that arbitration is the way to take the decision out of Amazon's hands, and then just a little bit more about what arbitration is. So in my mind, arbitration is like going to court, except it's faster, it's substantially cheaper, and it's supposed to be more efficient. Sometimes Amazon tries to drag their feet a bit, but it is supposed to be more efficient and more cost efficient. The arbitrator acts as a judge. It's usually a retired judge or a retired lawyer or someone who's litigated and has vast experience with the law. And ultimately, there's a final hearing just like there would be in court. So like I said before, a lot of the issues that we see in arbitration are for violations of Amazon's policy. So baseless authenticity issues, issues with inventory. You know, sometimes, like Travis was saying, sellers might not use the most reputable shipper to send their products into Amazon warehouses. We have dozens of cases where even using UPS, clients have sent 3, 4, 5 dozen pallets to Amazon, and Amazon's like, oh, we never got it. And so that guy's out, you know, a few $100,000 in inventory, and he has no other recourse other than to file for arbitration against Amazon.
I mean, even going off that, a lot of times if you're stuck at the end of a suspension, you'll get that dreadful notice which says, not only are we not reinstating your privileges, but we're going to destroy your inventory in X amount of hours if this isn't resolved or if we don't hear from you. I mean, not everybody is attentive to their email within 24 hours to find out the next morning all of their inventory might have been destroyed. That's the key chance, that's the opportunity you want to take to arbitrate against Amazon. The burden is, you know, on both parties. They have to prove, well, how do we justify destroying all this inventory?
Yes, sir.
How can you get them to stop in 24 hours?
How can we get them to?
So you said send an email in 24 hours we're going to...
Oh, we always send, we make sure we give the client something to send within the 24-hour period for sure. That's,
Yeah.
We get up and call you and say, we're able to stand?
we try to, I mean, as long as our workload permits it, if there's an emergency, if there's something, but usually when clients call in with those, usually when clients call in with the 24-hour notification, we do our best to make sure we can have someone get something out the door within 24 hours, of course. You know, we built the business off of helping sellers with suspensions and getting the accounts back. We've developed into the arbitration area, into the brand protection and intellectual property enforcement. But helping sellers with those issues is how we started. It's our bread and butter, and it's what we love to do. One of the statistics we keep is how many jobs we've saved. I think it was over 45,000 for 2018 between all the accounts that we were able to get reinstated as a firm. So it's really important for us to make sure that things are done timely, and we understand the stress that sellers are put under. So definitely, you know, if you ever have anything urgent, feel free to call.
Yeah, and I will say that because, like I said, I have the management experience with the actual suspensions and the appeals. So when we get a call and it's 24-hour, it's definitely given top priority. It almost means put down everything you're doing unless there's another 24-hour notice you're working on and address this right away. Given there's usually never an issue keeping to that time frame, you know, we've even had instances where some guy goes, oh my God, I got a 24-hour notice 17 hours ago. We only have a few more hours till I can respond, and we've still, in that instance, put down what we were doing to make sure he gets his plan in time.
Yeah, and Unfortunately, another reason sellers might end up arbitrating a suspension issue that they were unable to resolve is because Amazon makes mistakes all the time. One recent one that comes to mind is we filed about a month ago. A family was selling used books on Amazon, and they received a customer claim that the book was inauthentic because it was a release by the publisher that was not printed with a binding on it, but it was a pre-release version that was real, it was authentic, it was licensed by the publisher to be sold, but the customer complained about it because they didn't like that it had a spiral binding on it. That person was doing $200,000 a month on Amazon. All their funds were frozen, and their ability to conduct business was totally suspended. Amazon does make mistakes all the time. We were able to show Amazon's attorneys who handle the arbitrations that, one, they worked with a school district to source their books that were totally legitimate, and two, the publisher had written a letter evidencing that they had permission to sell that book. So that one was an issue that was costing the seller a huge headache. Their arbitration, because of the amount of money they were going after, was going to be very expensive, but because of the relationship that we have and because Amazon made a mistake, we were able to resolve that one last week, have a settlement contract signed and executed by Amazon, and they're back to selling now. So we hope that you guys never have to arbitrate. We hope that you never do anything wrong, but even if Amazon makes a mistake, there's always an option, and you should never, ever, ever let Amazon keep your money. So the arbitration process is very, very similar to litigation in court, and I'll try to make this brief since I hope that none of you ever have to go this route, and I know that a lot of you are new with the Amazon issues. But the first step is filing a demand for arbitration, which is just like filing a complaint in court. It's a basic summary of what the issue is, the facts, and the legal theories that justify reinstatement of the account or release of your funds or proper enforcement of your intellectual property complaint or removal of a baseless intellectual property complaint that someone keeps filing without the permission to do so. From there, Amazon has the opportunity to answer your complaint the same way that they would in court. They acknowledge that they've received it, they've outlined their position, which frankly is usually, we deny all accusations on a fancy letter that says nothing else other than that with, 2 pages of nonsense. But from there, an arbitrator is appointed. We'll have a preliminary conference where we set a schedule for your final hearing, and then we'll work backwards from there. We have an opportunity to request documents and information from Amazon that they have about you. They have the opportunity to ask us the same thing. We go into a briefing period where we get to prepare the arbitrator for what we're going to argue, and then we ultimately get to the final hearing. We also like to make sure, you guys might be wondering, where do I go to arbitration with Amazon if it's not in court? The contract that you guys have, that business solutions agreement, it does not specify a location. It specifies that the parties must agree. Amazon typically fights for it to be in Seattle. We think Seattle must love Amazon because of all the jobs that they bring there and try to avoid any potential for unfair bias. So usually we're able to conduct the hearing via video or telephone conference with arbitrators drawn from the city where our clients are located, and that's kind of a handshake agreement we have with the firm with Amazon, so it's not always a guarantee that that'll happen, but we're usually able to save you money by eliminating travel expenses and having the arbitration take place via video or telephone in your home city.
So yeah, just to again go over everything, we've discussed some of the policy violations, some of the infringement complaints, and some of the customer complaints that result in suspensions. We've gone over a few ways to avoid these suspensions. And again, if you really are at the end of the road, there's always the option for arbitration should the appeals not be working. I know there's Amazon sellers here. Does anybody have any questions, issues in particular we didn't cover they'd like to discuss? Sure.
So how long from most of your clients will they get that first letter of suspension until they're finally ready to sell suspensions?
It varies issue to issue. Response times with Amazon, it could be 2 to 3 business days. It could be the same day, depending on how many issues they're tackling. If it's just one complaint, if it's just 2 inauthentic complaints, it's generally just a day or 2, maybe at most a week. If there's 370 intellectual property complaints, 2 safety issues, and things like that, tends to take a little bit more, could take up to a month, but really it varies by issue and the severity of the issue and how many actual policy violations or infringement reports you've received.
And also, like we brought up before, or I think you brought up before, it could also be reflective of the time of the year. You know, during the holiday
Right.
season, response rates decline and suspensions increase. So that's when you want to be extra, extra careful.
And there's multiple teams you can go to. If you're actually trying like seller performance, there's other teams you can reach out to. It's always good to try seller support. Try and do anything you can to expedite a response as fast as possible. Jeff Bezos has an email as well. If you're not getting any responses, it's always good to try and reach out to his team.
He's not going to answer, guys, though.
Yeah.
It'll be
A
someone
representative of Jeff Bezos' team will respond to you. Any other questions?
else. Anybody, or stories, or
Sure.
How many, let's say, intellectual property complaints trigger a
that's a good question.
In my experience, it depends on the volume of the seller. If he's a large seller, they tend to accrue more before it actually results in suspension. More of the brick and mortar, smaller type businesses tend to receive a suspension a little bit faster, maybe after about 5 or 10. There's really no specific number. The only correlation I can make to that is the size of the seller.
Have you received intellectual property complaints before?
yes.
And how do you deal with them?
It's very frustrating because I'm a third-party seller. I
Right.
work with distributors and manufacturers myself. And sometimes I see the same item up by another vendor. Before I put it up, and Amazon says, no, you must take a ride on another guy's hotel because we want to make our own listings.
Right.
Going to the guys saying, I'm selling, get intellectual property.
And it's baseless.
Well,
It's baseless. You're selling that you match the.
here's where I bought it, and I know there's other customers who also bought it at the same place as the vendor.
Yeah.
So why,
So,
sorry, nothing to do about it.
like I was saying to the gentleman over here before, if you're thinking of selling a product and you're wondering, is this brand going to be problematic, it's always good to look how many other sellers are on this listing. If there's 50 sellers, you're generally going to be okay. If you see there's only 2 other people on that listing, even though it might be a good product, chances are the individual or the brand owner there is policing that listing and is going to file those complaints to get people.
It says they have one to sell the button.
Mhm.
Sell the button. Well, Tom told me, if you can hit that button and it comes up and you're not a sell, then it's okay. It's not granted.
Generally. So just to go into a little more, so what I was saying before, I'll go back in just a few slides. The 3 most common are copyright, trademark, patent. 2 things every seller should know. 1, when someone creates a listing page, especially as the brand owner with the rights to the images, to the trademark logo or name they're going to use in that listing, they've waived the right to claim infringement just for you joining that listing. They can't say you're, unauthorized use of our image. They put that image there, and by doing so, they granted the perpetual license for other sellers to join it, and they've waived the right to say that's copyright infringement. What you got to be a little more cautious of is the listing you're joining originally created by this company. Is it a duplicate? It's hard to tell sometimes. Usually you could tell by the individual's name to create it. If you see there's 10 that are identical, like Nike, and then one says Nike shoes or Nike sneaker seller, and you see that was the person who created that, I would avoid it. They probably don't have the rights to use those images. Trademark complaints get a little more complicated. What we were explaining before, as you're aware as a third-party seller, first sale doctrine permits you as a third-party seller, if you buy something, it's in the exact manufacturer, condition, packaging, and you could sell that in accordance with all United States law. There is an exception, which states if there's a material difference. Now, what we've seen often, and when it really comes down to policing where it seems like a bogus complaint, what it really is, they're making an artificial argument that there's a material difference. How do they do that? They claim the warranty their company offers is not included or is not offered by unauthorized sellers. Courts have consistently upheld that a lack of a warranty, especially if it's like a lifetime warranty replacement, Amazon only offers a 90-day guarantee. That is a pretty significant difference as a consumer. Somebody who's going to buy this product, if I go to return it 4 months from now, I have no recourse. But if I actually bought it from the brand, I can return it for the rest of my life. Good way to look that up, if you're thinking about joining a listing and you look at that brand, their website will almost, like 99.9% of the time, have a little exculpatory language on their warranty which says doesn't apply to unauthorized sellers, only applies to the following 10 people, doesn't apply to people selling on Amazon who aren't the following, you know? So a good way to combat that, if you feel like the listing is just giving you this bogus trademark complaint, I can almost guarantee that person who filed it, if you go to their website, you're going to see there's some provision in their warranty which states there's a material difference. We found that's the only successful way.
But they don't have a website.
No website.
There's no website. If a listing is trademark,
Mhm.
people put up their name. They bring their name and go sell it. That's it. The products are not trademarked. The products are both the same way as combine.
Yeah.
And that's the most frustrating part about it.
And I sent pictures, I bought from them of these.
Yeah.
Amazon has no gatekeeper.
I know.
All the same. Sorry.
One of the things I started with was Amazon gives way, way, way too much power to these complainants. You know, I don't know if you've ever sold on eBay, but on eBay, you have to heavily, heavily vet that complaint before it's filed. They won't allow it to go through until they're reviewing your actual copyright registry, till they see your trademark, you know, all that information. They won't allow it to go through. Amazon, you can hit the send button 30 times. It might go through one time. And it gives these individuals so much power. One thing I will say, if it's truly a case where there's no infringement, something we deal with all the time, seeing an attorney letterhead come to your door and discussing this issue, and you with full knowledge, hey, wait, I didn't really have a plausible claim to file that trademark infringement, they're going to likely retract it before it causes more trouble. If you do run into those issues, we're glad to help. That's always something we can assist with. Sure.
I think we might be running out of time. They just gave us the little wave in the back, but we have a booth set up in the other room.
Yeah, we're at 45. If anybody has any additional questions, just feel free to come talk to us.
We
We're
have
here.
suspension guides that we're giving away, some other reading materials we can get to you. And
Yeah.
we're happy to give any advice or, you know, keep coaching you guys about Amazon issues.
And the books we have are free, so feel free to grab one. There's definitely going to be some good knowledge you can attain from them. Thank you.